Beresh harmanuta de malka, galif gilufe betihiru ila'a, he engraved engravings in the luster on high. A spark of impenetrable darkness emerged within the concealed of the concealed.
It is an honor and a gift to be here with you today, Professor Daniel Matt.
Thank you.
And the reason that's the case is because you have done a tremendous kindness, not just to the Jewish people and their literature and their history, but also to the world, I think. One of the, if not the greatest mystical texts in Jewish history, the Zohar, remained for many centuries obscure and hidden and shrouded under layers of mystery, and perhaps still is in many ways. But you made the magnificent, monumental achievement over the course of many years to translate that text into English. And besides for the many other beautiful works of scholarship, which I hope that we get to discuss, that one is a shining gem and jewel, and a text which I've engaged with as a teacher, and many have. And for that, we are thankful and grateful and glad to be here to discuss that magnificent text together.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a great adventure working on it, and I'm getting to teach from it now too. That's a treat.
Getting to teach from your own translation.
Yeah.
That's exciting. I'd love to begin with the person in front of us, because sometimes when we approach a text, the text can be isolated from the person who brought it into being, or the translation isolated from the person. And here we have a chance to meet the person who brought it into being. And I'd love to hear your story of how you came to the Zohar, what attracted you to this, to the point that you were then in a position to be the one, to be the midwife and messenger to translate it into English.
Right. Well, I think it certainly goes back to my dad. My father was a rabbi, and I grew up learning Torah and learning Hebrew, studying with him. I remember sitting with him on the couch Shabbat afternoon and going over the Parsha. We would kind of divide Shabbat afternoon between studying, and then I and my brothers would run out and play basketball in the driveway. So it was a nice balance. But love of Torah, and almost you could say parental love and love of learning went hand in hand. So I grew up loving the text, loving studying. Certainly not Zohar. My dad never opened the Zohar for me, or I don't know if at all. In fact, he had a more rational approach, a rationalistic approach, but he had a deep spirituality. I always felt that he had a personal relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, with the Holy One, blessed be He. So I felt a genuine spirituality from him, and I drank that in, and I naturally wanted to feel that also and pursue that. So I think I was looking for the element in Judaism that was especially spiritual and intimate and mystical. And I didn't know really what Kabbalah was or Zohar, but I remember my freshman year at Brandeis, I got interested in Hasidic texts. I think through Buber, through the writings of Martin Buber, his tales of the Hasidim, but moving from the stories to some Hasidic texts, and they would frequently quote the Zohar. Just a phrase, a word, a line or two, but it was intriguing, this Aramaic phrase in the middle of a Hebrew page. So that piqued my interest in it. I wanted to pursue it. And my junior year abroad, I went to Jerusalem to study at Hebrew University, and I knew that was my opportunity to, study it with scholars of Kabbalah. Gershom Scholem was teaching no longer, but his students were teaching, and I took beginning Zohar and advanced Zohar simultaneously. I had 1 year, so I said, let's do as much as I can, and I was totally lost in advanced Zohar, but that didn't matter because I was also lost in beginning Zohar, because that's the way the Zohar is. You can't approach it without feeling confounded and perplexed. And I think the Zohar intends that. So I struggled with it and was challenged by it, but I really fell totally in love with it that year, and I knew I wanted to pursue it.
So your father, your father, a rabbi, introduces you to a love of Jewish text and learning.
Right.
Those delightful Shabbat afternoons,
Yeah.
which many can resonate, hopefully. And from there, through people like Mata Buber and his beautiful translations and stories into Chassidut, and then finally Hebrew University into the confounding and beautiful text of the Zohar itself.
Right.
Was it love at first sight with the Zohar, or was it a challenge and struggle?
Yeah, it was definitely I was intrigued by it and challenged by it, and I had a certain facility with Hebrew texts and even some Aramaic texts, but this seemed on a different level, at a different pitch. So, the Zohar is so intriguing because so much of the Zohar is Bible and Talmud and Midrash, right? A
Sure.
typical page, it'll be quoting Bible, but what does he quote? The most beautiful books of the Bible. It's not usually Chronicles or the Book of Kings. It's Isaiah and Song of Songs and Job, and then Talmud. But what parts of the Talmud? The juiciest, most radical theological things in the Talmud, that God needs us. The idea that God needs us. It's one of the great, focuses of the Zohar. And you find that in rabbinic texts, but just, you have to read a lot of Talmud to find a line that says God needs us. The Zohar takes these little hints and really, expands them and develops them into full teachings.
Certainly. How was it that the project, the opportunity, the challenge to translate the Zohar fell into your lap? I'd love to hear a bit
So
of that
that's
story as
a
well.
fascinating story. I got a phone call one day from my good friend Art Green. And he said, there's a family in Chicago that wants to commission you to translate the Zohar. So I was totally overwhelmed, and I said, I have to think about this. He said, sure, sure. So I thought about it for a week, for a month, for a few months. Finally, I remember I got the phone call from him in September. Finally, in December, I had a break from teaching. I said, look, for the next month, next 6 weeks, I'm going to take off. I'm just going to try it. Without having talked to him further, certainly without having met the Pritzkers, I said, I'm going to see if I can handle this. So every day I translated for as long as I could, 4 hours, 5 hours. And after that month, I decided I'm definitely not doing this. It's just too much. I felt sucked in by it, and I didn't know if I could handle it. So I remember calling Art and saying, this is an amazing opportunity, but I just have to say no. He said, he's very wise. He said, I understand, but why don't you just meet with the Pritzkers and tell them no? So that was my mistake. I agreed to meet, and we met Art Green and Rabbi Yechiel Pupko, who was very central in this whole thing. He had been studying with Margot Pritzker. Margot Pritzker of the Pritzker family, she had a deep love of Torah and was studying with Rabbi Yechiel Pupko, doing Parshat HaShavua, the weekly Torah portion, and other things, and then she wanted to study Zohar. So they began by using the existing translation of the Zohar, what's often called the Sonsino Zohar, because it was translated by Sonsino Press. That was done in the 1930s, I think. And after studying it for a while, one of them said to the other, this is, probably Rabbi Pupko said to Margot Pritzker, this is an inadequate translation. And Margot said, well, let's do a new one.
Hmm.
So the idea really came out of their Torah study,
Hmm.
which is beautiful.
Hmm.
And they got to me maybe through Art Green. And so we finally met. But we were meeting basically, from my point of view, for me to explain why I just couldn't do it. So we met Art Green and Rabbi Pupko and Margot Pritzker, myself. They own the Hyatt Corporation. We met at a Hyatt hotel at O'Hare Airport. I was flying back from the East Coast. So we met, and I started explaining to Margot how this was an amazing opportunity, but I just felt it was too much. She said, I understand your hesitation, but if you did do it, how long would it take? I said, 12 to 15 years. She said, you're not scaring me. And I remember at that moment something just clicked or flipped inside of me. And I said, oh, okay, I'll do it. I think it was like she was challenging me. It wasn't too much for her. Why was it too much for me?
Right.
So she was aware of the scale of it and the demand. And I I took it on. I remember coming home and telling my wife, and she said, "I thought you were going to say no." But at that point, I'd said yes, and that's how the project began.
Mm,
And then there were, from then it even took a good while until we actually began because I was teaching here in Berkeley. And originally we thought the way we worked it out with my school, with the Graduate Theological Union, was that I would teach half-time and translate half-time. That was the arrangement we made. But it turned out I was up for a sabbatical.
mm,
The first year of the project, I had a sabbatical coming to me, so I had an entire year to do it. And then it turned out there was a special program in Jerusalem at the Institute for Advanced Study, part of the Hebrew University, devoted to Zohar.
mm,
Yehuda Liebes, the great Zohar scholar, had created a program for 1 year. I was invited to it, so my school realized this was a special opportunity. So they said, okay, even though you had sabbatical, you can take 1 more year. So we were in Jerusalem, so now I had 2 years just to work on the translation. After that year was so wonderful being in Jerusalem,
mm.
translating there, that I decided I wanted to stay another year. So I said to GTU, I just need to stay. They said, okay, look, take 1 more year, but then you have to tell us if you're quitting or coming back. And after that second year, I wanted to stay longer and longer. At that point, I resigned from my position. So really, from the beginning of the project on, I never went back to full-time or even part-time normal academic teaching. I was really able to devote myself to the project, and it
Mm.
turned out to be 18 years.
Wow.
I had told Margot 12 to 15, but she told me she always thought it would be somewhat longer. And I did, of the Pritzker edition is 12 volumes.
Right.
I did 9 of those volumes. The 9 volumes I did cover the Zohar's commentary on the Torah.
Hmm.
So it's the main body of the Zohar. In fact, it's often called Guf HaZohar, the body of the Zohar. But there are other shorter sections on Song of Songs, on Ruth, on Ezekiel's vision. Those last 3 volumes, 2 other people did under my guidance, Nathan Wolski and Joel Hecker. So the entire thing was completed a year or two, I think just a year after I completed mine, because they
Wow,
started
magnificent,
before I finished.
magnificent. 18 years is really a lifetime, right? It's a lifetime relationship with a text.
Yeah.
And when you're describing those 2 years that you spent in Jerusalem,
It turned out to be 4
four
years.
years,
The first 4 of the first 5 years of the project, I was fortunate enough to be in Yerushalayim.
it sounds almost romantic,
Yeah.
being in the ancient city with these ancient texts. And certainly the work that you're doing, and we'll speak about the academic side and establishing the critical edition and working with manuscripts, but it also seems to me that there's a spiritual engagement with that text beyond just the academic. I'd love to hear about what that felt like
Yeah.
in the act of translating, in the act of bringing it to life in
Yeah.
English for you.
Certainly. I mean, I think, fortunately, because my dad was a rabbi and my initial exposure, my initial immersion in Torah was one with a spiritual focus, a religious focus. And even when I went to Brandeis, I studied at Brandeis, undergraduate and graduate, and I first wanted to be a Bible scholar.
Mm,
The first course I took was with a great Bible scholar, Nahum Sarna,
mm.
but he happened to teach that year Ezekiel, the first chapter of Ezekiel, which is a mystical vision of the chariot. It's really the basis of all Jewish mysticism. So even though, I worked in an academic environment for, a good part of my career, I had that initial spiritual drive. Really, my yearning was to have an intimacy with God, with the divine, with ultimate reality, and that was through the text. People you often say, well, either you're, you know, studying a text or you're having a mystical experience. But in Judaism, studying itself can become a mystical experience. Sometimes it isn't. Certainly there are people who approach it just academically, but the fact that you're reading a text doesn't mean it's not spiritual. And for me, I've always felt that the spiritual and the academic have to help one another. I think each one it gives you part of the picture, and that if you have just one or the other, you miss something. If you have just the academic approach, you're certainly missing the power of the teaching. If you have just the spiritual approach without any academic tools, you can miss the context, and it can be not as rich as possible. It's certainly true with the Zohar.
Certainly. I mean, from the Zohar's perspective, engaging with the text of the Zohar and with the wisdom of the tradition is engaging romantically, erotically, even with God, with the mind of God. The study of Torah from the Zohar's perspective is an act of dveikut, an act of intimacy with divinity,
Right.
is it not?
Right. The phrase the Zohar uses, probably hundreds of times is ishtadal ba'oraita, right, which you can translate engage in Torah. But engage in English has a romantic sense too. And
Mm,
ishtadal can mean
mm,
to wrestle with a text, to grapple with a text. It also can mean
mm,
to be seduced by the text. So there's a love relationship with Torah. The Zohar is devoted to that. One of the great passages of the Zohar, maybe we'll talk about, is how the Torah is attracting the student. And it's very much a romantic, even an erotic relationship. So there's a love affair between the student of Torah and Torah. This isn't just in the mystical sense. You find this in rabbinic texts too. The study of Torah is a romantic involvement,
certainly.
right? Torah is feminine, and the male student, often the male student in traditional texts, is falling in love with the Torah, and that's all the more so with Zohar. Certainly, you miss the power of the Zohar if you're just analyzing it. And I felt that constantly. On the other hand, sometimes you want to stop and open up a dictionary, open up the lexicon, check the CD. Where else does this phrase come? And that helps you understand
True.
it. But if you do that, you'll run across other passages that are just as intensely personal and
Certainly.
intimate.
Certainly. I'm getting this interesting imagery of this dance between the romantic and the rigorous,
Yes.
the erotic and the technical, and moving back and forth between them is almost its own dance.
Yeah, you could say that's reflected in the Sefirot, the 10
Mm,
qualities of God, the 10 aspects of God's personality. And the main pair of opposites there, one of the main pairs of opposites is chesed and gevurah, love and rigor. So love is this passion, and gevurah is this rigor, and I think you need both to make sense of the text. You have to look up a dictionary and figure out what the word means, but to know what it really means is to feel it inside of you. When you're studying Zohar, you think you're studying what's on the page, but the Zohar is forcing you to
mm,
study with the dynamics within
mm,
yourself.
mm,
And that's the difficulty of the Zohar, is you run across something which doesn't make sense because it can only make sense if you experience it.
mm,
So the Zohar is set up in such a way that you can't make sense of it unless you're open to its spiritual power.
mm. It really does sound like the years you spent translating were a real relationship with the text, one in which it wasn't just the text that was being brought to light and being exposed in that relationship and learnt about, but also yourself in that encounter with the text.
Yeah, I was struggling with it every day, and discovering new layers of meaning in the text and new facets of myself. My wife really went through it with me, and she attests to that. She says my face was radiant after 5 or 6 hours of studying.
Wow.
I'm not sure I agree totally, but there were constant epiphanies, constant little breakthroughs, understanding a word and then feeling how true it
Mm,
was in an inner
mm,
sense.
mm. I would love to hear about some of those. I'd also love to ask about challenging moments, specific phrases, periods, texts, words even that were elusive and hard to find. If I understand correctly, part of the reason why you were tapped to translate this is, besides you being a great scholar of Jewish mysticism, and the text, is that you're also a poet, and the text is poetic. And I'm curious, what were some of the challenges poetically, linguistically, syntactically that you found along the way?
Yeah, this really takes us to the unique language of the Zohar, right? The Zohar was written in Aramaic, which is kind of strange because Jewish books that were written in the Middle Ages were written in Hebrew, very rarely, hardly ever in Aramaic. The Aramaic, of course, takes us back to the Talmud, right, 1,000 years before the Zohar. But the Zohar being composed in the 13th century in Spain, why doesn't the author write in Hebrew? So he's writing in Aramaic, but it's a bizarre Aramaic. It's really his own concoction of Aramaic. And that itself made it difficult because sometimes they're invented words. Sometimes they're neologisms that don't exist in any dictionary, in any normal Aramaic dictionary. So trying to figure out what those invented words means, that was certainly a challenge. But just the symbolism of the Zohar, the richness of the Zohar, the Zohar doesn't come out and say what it means.
Mm.
If the Zohar is talking about the Shechinah, the feminine aspect of God, it hardly ever uses the name Shechinah.
Mm.
So she's the holy apple orchard,
Mm-hmm.
or she's the ocean, she's the well, she's the garden. So how do you know when he's talking about a garden and when he's talking about Shekhinah? Is it the ocean? Is it Shekhinah? So the Zohar forces you to keep wondering, what's going on here? What does this mean? And it was constant challenge. In a sense, only when I was done should I really have begun. But bit by bit, I tried to make sense of it, and it was a great help to look at parallels in the Zohar. If a
Mm.
word is unclear
Mm.
here, even one of his invented words, maybe a slight variation on that invented word appears later, and I was able to track those down, and one usage would enrich another.
In that act of translating, and particularly in those challenging moments that you're describing, how much are you relying on prior scholarship, prior translation, prior commentaries, both from academic vantage points and from traditional vantage points? Who are the
Yeah,
thinkers and texts that you're pulling
yeah.
on in that process?
Yeah, I would try to, it's such a difficult task. I tried to get help wherever I could. Colleagues who work in Zohar, and that second year of the project, when I was in Jerusalem, in the special program devoted to the Zohar, it was like 10 or 15 people, many of whom were specialists, most of whom were specialists in Kabbalah or Zohar. So we would meet regularly to study, and usually during those meetings, we went over things that I was translating, the Aramaic and how I rendered it. So I got their feedback on that. That was invaluable.
Mhm.
But in my own work, the work was, solitary, basically. I only had one research assistant, and her and his job was a man and then later a woman. Their job was simply to find for me variations in the manuscripts of the Zohar. Because this is important, so we should talk about this for a moment. When I began the project, I figured I would translate from a standard text of the Zohar, from the standard printed edition. But I had access to some original manuscripts of the Zohar, going back to the 14th, 15th centuries, and I thought that I would check them occasionally. So after checking them, I was already maybe a couple months into the project, a month or two into the project. I looked at some of the manuscripts and I saw the readings were different
Mm.
than the printed text. And I realized I couldn't rely on the printed text. I really had to see page by page how manuscript readings might have differed, how they did differ from what became the later printed version. So the Pritzkers were willing to hire a research assistant whose sole job was to make a list page by page. The Zohar says this, the printed Zohar says this, but the manuscript has a different reading. And I would get a Word file every week
Mm.
or two, on the next few pages of the Zohar
Mm.
showing me these variations.
Mm.
That was a tremendous aid. And basically, from that point on, I didn't translate until I had gone over my own copy of the Zohar and written into my own copy of the Zohar what I thought were good changes that were reflected in the manuscript. So what I ended up doing was reconstructing the text of the Zohar based on manuscript readings.
Mm.
So what does that mean? That means that, for example, almost every scribe who copied the Zohar would put in his own 2 cents.
Mm.
He would say, well, this is such a strange word, let's substitute it for a more normal word.
Mm.
Or if the Zohar quoted the Talmud and misquoted it, intentionally paraphrasing it, sometimes the scribe will put in the correct quote from the Zohar. So I didn't want that correct quote. I wanted what the authors of the Zohar actually wrote originally, and that was in the manuscripts, not in the printed edition. So my translation reflects my reconstructed text of the Zohar. Often they're very small changes. I'll give you one example, beautiful example. The printed Zohar says the Shechinah is the garden above. But that above was added in. The real original wording is the Shekhinah is the garden.
Mm.
And it's more beautiful. It's
Mm.
simpler, but
Mhm.
it's also harder to make sense of. You say the garden above, you say, okay, there's a garden and the Shekhinah. The Zohar doesn't want to do that, though. The Zohar says, no, the Shekhinah is a garden. In some sense, she is fruitful. She is
Mm.
verdant. She
Mm.
is, the Zohar wants to overcome the dichotomy between what's above and what's
Correct.
below.
Correct.
One is affecting the other. There's an interplay.
Correct.
So sometimes small changes in the manuscript show that. So I basically turned the Zohar into text that's more difficult. More difficult because I took out what the scribes had explained. Then in my commentary, at the bottom of each page is an extensive commentary. There, I, of course, had to explain to the best of my ability what it meant. But the top half of the page is the raw, naked text of the Zohar, a little more lyrical, more poetic, more cryptic. And so that was a challenge to establish a text. It slowed down the work, but it made it more authentic and more valuable. So the language was a challenge. The mystical meaning, where is the Zohar going with a verse? The Zohar will quote a verse in the Bible, but it will interpret it in a very different way than the literal meaning. So how should I translate it? Should I translate it according to what the verse actually means
Right.
in the book of Proverbs, in the book of Isaiah, or how the Zohar takes it to mean? So different passages require different approaches. Usually what I would do is translate it according to its actual biblical meaning
Mm.
and then show how the Zohar was altering
Yeah.
that meaning.
Yeah. I have to say from my own personal experience, and this is a way that I can express my gratitude to you, what we call in Judaism a hakarat tov. I've engaged with your text and taught with
Mm,
it and from it.
mm,
And both the way that you've chosen to translate things and left them with their original melodic mystery and
mm,
enigmas, and also your footnotes beneath the running commentary are both absolutely magnificent, and
mm.
each independently tremendous contributions.
Thank you.
I got a chance actually to teach the Yinukkah section of the Zohar with a dear friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Justin Sledge, and that's
Mm,
available online for people to watch. And we do that grappling with you as a voice in that text, right? So we're sitting there with Rashbi and Dilion and each other
mm.
and you, and we're all part of that conversation together.
Yeah,
It's interesting. You said that translating it, you did mainly solitary, but so much of the energy of the Zohar is a collective, is a Haraya Kadisha, is this
right,
is a group dynamic. And even when we're sitting alone with the text, there's so many voices at play in
right.
that dynamic.
Yeah, it's really a question. Does the Zohar reflect, is it kind of transcribing a discussion between these chavraya, between
Mm.
these companions?
Hmm.
So in the Zohar, the companions are walking through the Galilee, right? The author is writing in Spain, but he's imagining himself in Galilee, in Eretz Israel, in the Holy Land. So does the Zohar reflect a group of Kabbalists studying together? Very possibly.
Right.
And, I was doing it alone, but I was in touch with colleagues, and from years of teaching, teaching gives you so much. You think you're teaching the students, but they're teaching you. So in a sense, during my years of real deep immersion in the translation, I wasn't teaching actively, but I drew on, what I'd learned over the years, and I felt a fellowship with the population of the Zohar, with the
Certainly.
characters
Certainly.
in the Zohar.
Yeah.
I was saying that the translation and the commentary, because the commentary is so extensive, I could keep the
Mm.
translation
Mm.
so cryptic.
Mm.
So I didn't want the translation to be, so I didn't want it to be explanatory. I wanted the notes to be explanatory. When the book came out, there were various reviews, and most of them were positive. My favorite comment in a review was, "It's still in Aramaic,"
Yes.
because I wanted the English to retain some of that strangeness
Certainly.
of the language. Sometimes it meant looking for a strange English word to render the strange Aramaic,
Certainly.
but sometimes it was just, no, I'm not going to explain what it means. Many translations will explain what the text means. The Sonsino translation, for example, that prior translation, it has a certain beauty to it, but there's no commentary. Because of that, the translation itself has to be a kind of
Right.
interpretive
Right.
translation. And I didn't want that. I
Right.
wanted the translation to reflect the weirdness of the Zohar's Aramaic, and then in the Perush at the bottom of the page, the commentary, I could try. It's interesting, as the volumes proceeded, as I got to volume 3 and 4 and 5, I noticed that more often I was saying in the notes, apparently. Apparently, it means
Mm,
this,
mm,
because you really shouldn't pin down too precisely
certainly,
what the Zohar is saying.
certainly. Yeah, I so respect that desire to keep the mystery of the Zohar
Yeah,
present, and it's
right.
certainly reflective in the translation. It almost has like a skeletal feel that you're still
Mm,
grasping with that with the mystery,
mm,
and it's not entirely fleshed out, which leaves it open for so many more ways of reading it, right? Which is part of the
right.
beauty. English can be very, in its precision, can be very definitive and very
Mm,
constrictive.
right.
Semitic languages have this open valence, and one word can mean many things, and
Yes.
sentences can mean so many things.
Good.
There are so many wonderful classic texts of Jewish mysticism.
Mm,
Um, what is it about the Zohar that makes it so unique and such a powerful text that it has taken this role as not just the central text in from a historical and literary perspective in Jewish mysticism,
mm.
but seen almost as the third most sacred text in Judaism as a whole for many Jewish communities. What do you think it is about the text itself that allowed it to become that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Some people would say the Zohar is the third holiest book in Judaism, the Torah, the Talmud, the Zohar. But remember, the Zohar isn't an independent book, right? It's a perush, it's a commentary on the Torah. And for those who take it seriously or spiritually, it's trying to penetrate the outer layer of the text and discover the deepest meaning. So for some people, a good number of people, it's the holiest book because
Right.
it shows you the deepest layer possible in
True.
in in
True.
in Torah. So what is it about, to me, it's so different than other Kabbalistic texts. I'm fascinated by Kabbalah and I study it and teach it, but to me the Zohar is in a different category. And I think it's a good deal the language, the poetic language, but I think it's basically the state of mind, the state of consciousness of the author.
Mm,
Now, there was certainly not one author for the entire Zohar, that's now clear. But the main author was probably this fascinating figure, Moses de Leon. We know of Ponce de Leon, right, who a few centuries later discovered the fountain of youth.
mm,
And Moses de Leon is somehow rejuvenating
mm,
Judaism. There's
mm,
something very youthful. You mentioned the Yanuka, this little child who kind of torments the rabbis with tough questions. There's a little child running through the Zohar.
mm,
Every once in a while, he'll actually pop up, but the whole Zohar has this childlike innocence and playfulness and a certain roguish quality, even occasionally. So it's the state of mind of the author. What I mean by that is he never comes out and identifies who he is, right? The weird thing about the Zohar is you don't have the name of the author, of the actual author on the title page. It's attributed to this ancient Rabbi Shimon, and he certainly had a role to play in the Zohar. I mean, he's the main character in the Zohar. So Moses de Leon is writing the Zohar in the 13th century, but the whole Zohar is about Rabbi Shimon and his circle of friends, of colleagues, of disciples, and the claim emerged that the Zohar was composed back at the time of Rabbi Shimon. Moshe Dayan promotes that claim. In other words, the actual author, Moses Dayan, never comes out and admits that he's the author,
mm,
and I think he's liberated from normal ego consciousness. He is not aware that he is the author
mm,
at certain points at
mm,
least. He feels that he's perhaps channeling ancient wisdom.
mm,
Now, you could say that's very bizarre, but really, if you think of any creative artist,
mm,
a great sculptor, a poet, a musician, the greatest artist will say, it wasn't me. It came through me, right? The muse we hear about, right, in Greek poetry. But almost all great creative artists will say, something beyond my normal self came through me. And Moses de Leon is in touch with something deeper than his normal state of mind. And I think that frees him poetically and creatively. And that's what contributes to, more than contributes to, that's what creates the powerful style of the Zohar.
mm. You said something very interesting along these lines just before we began recording, which is that because we have texts from Moshe de Leon that he's
Right.
writing in his own name in Hebrew, and there are also works of Kabbalah and
Yeah.
mystical philosophy. you said that in those texts, he's self-conscious of himself as an author
Right.
and as the person putting forward these ideas. Whereas in the Zohar, as you're saying now, he's stepping aside and let something else flow through him.
Right.
And I found that distinction to be so
Yes.
rich in the phenomenology of the text there.
Yeah, a typical Hebrew book of Moses de Leon will begin, I am writing this book in Guadalajara, Spain, that is, not Mexico,
Right.
in Guadalajara in the Hebrew year corresponding to 1293. He dates it, he says where it's
Right.
written,
Right.
and so he knows who he is and where he is and when he is. In the Zohar, he's back a millennium earlier. He's inhabiting the realm or the mind of an ancient rabbi. Maybe he's channeling that wisdom. So in a sense, you could say he didn't write. In a sense, he was the scribe. He claims to be the scribe. And, as a poet will sometimes say, I'm just writing down what's coming through me.
Totally.
I think that was his experience. It may be even have been automatic writing that contributed to parts of the Zohar. We know there was that technique, and it's actually spoken about at an early point when people are discussing how the Zohar was written. Back at the time of the Zohar, one theory was that Moses de Leon was able to use what's called Shem HaKotev, the writing name. It was a divine name you would meditate on and go into some altered state, and things would come through you. We have examples of this and brief, not full descriptions of it, but references to it. And you have, at the time of the Zohar, one theory that that's how he wrote the Zohar. So that could well be that some of the time he was in this altered state. If he was, then I think he came down from that and did some careful, conscious editing.
Right.
But even that is in a playful style because he's hiding his identity.
Certainly.
And what does that mean? It's not only he's hiding his identity, he's questioning your own identity. Right? That really takes us to the mystical experience. It's very hard to define mysticism, but you could say most basically the mystic is surrendering the sense of self, letting the ego dissolve into the oneness of the cosmos. So questioning identity is central to the spiritual path and to the composition of the Zohar. Who is it? Is it Moses de Leon in the 13th century? Is it Rashbi a millennium earlier? It's fluid.
That's really beautiful that in the very act of the writing, we see mystical practices and perhaps
Right.
mystical experiences at play. Both, you were saying the Shema Koteb, this mystical Jewish practice of evoking the name of God to enter into a trance-like perhaps state of consciousness.
Right.
And also in the very question of putting aside the ego of the author, right? There is something inherently mystical about that. And he's not claiming it to be his.
Right.
That's really beautiful.
And this is reflected on another level too. What is the Zohar about? We really should talk about that. The Zohar is about God, but God, what about his name? What about his identity?
Right.
The Zohar is questioning how we identify God. So God is ultimately nameless. All of the biblical names for God are somehow inadequate. Yud-He Vav-He, that unpronounceable name. Elohim, Shaddai. For the Zohar, each of those names points to a certain quality of God, but beyond all of them, or permeating all of them, is the nameless God. Right? The Zohar does give it a title, Ein Sof, but what does Ein Sof mean? The infinite.
Right.
So infinity is the true reality of God. Any name that we try to impose on infinity is inadequate. So God is ultimately nameless. It's impossible to identify God. And the mystic feels that he somehow shares in that indefinability. So the mystic is able to get to a state where he's beyond name, and he's describing a reality which is beyond name. And so it's reflected in the text, in the consciousness of the writer, and in the subject matter, all three.
That's exquisite. That in the loosening and even absence of identity of the author, there's a communion with the subject which also has no identity, which is the divine nothingness. That's delightful.
Yeah, nothingness. Nothingness is one of my favorite words in all of Kabbalah, ayin.
Yes.
Right, the same word as en.
Yes.
Ein Sof, there is no end. Ayin is just nothingness.
Right.
This is ayin spelled with an aleph, by the way, not with an ayin.
Right.
Ayin is a letter, but ayin spelled aleph yud nun, nothingness. That is a name for what in the Zohar? For the highest of the 10 sefirot, the highest of the 10 qualities of God. Its name is nothing. Is that atheism? No, it's kind of a mystical, beyond theism. It's saying God is no thing. I think it's better pronounced no thingness. The no thingness of God. That's where the Zohar is aiming. You could say, the Kabbalah does say, you should turn your ani, your aleph nun yud, your ego, just switch a couple letters. Ani becomes ayin. The self melts into the no thingness of the divine. So ultimately, God is beyond name, and the Kabbalist is trying to get there.
I was reflecting yesterday with a friend that that ayin is both nothingness, but is also the I,
Yes,
right?
ayin with an ayin is an ayin.
Right.
Both of them. Keter is both of them. Keter is the constantly open
The
I,
open I, huh?
and
Which is also
in
nothing.
English you have
Right.
I and
Correct.
I.
Correct.
So they're sort
Also,
of
in
like,
English, you have this phrase, "the eye of the storm," and I was thinking about that, how we're lost in the tumult of
mm,
life, but at
mm,
the center, there's always that silent emptiness that
that's
we can
beautiful.
approach.
Yeah.
We're playing a bit with languages here, which is totally
Yes.
appropriate in the
Yeah.
linguistic play of the Zohar. To call the what's coming up for me in reflection to what you're sharing now, is that to call the Zohar's conception of God radical
Mm,
is an understatement,
yeah.
right? Um, and two questions are coming out for me. One is, how are the authors getting away with this?
Mm, mm,
It's such a revolutionary conception of God. We've been speaking now about the divine nothingness, which teeters on atheism or at least
mm.
non-theism. We haven't even spoken yet about the divine feminine, which is an incredible innovation of the Zohar,
Right.
and which I hope to get to. But how are they getting away with this, given the context of Jewish theology that precedes them and that the context that they're
Right.
working in? And what are Jews today to make of that conception in relationship to a God that they find in Hebrew school, in the Bible, in
Mm,
Halakha, which is much more objective, a person who has opinions and who a
patriarchal.
patriarchal and masculine
Yeah.
God, um, you know, so those are kind of the two questions that arise with
Right.
me. How are they getting away with this, and what are we supposed to do? How do we
Yeah.
reconcile the God of, let's say, the Bible and the God of the Zohar?
Yeah. I think, the Zohar's view of God is so radical, and this is linked to what we've been talking about, 13th century and going back to the time of Rabbi Shimon. Moses de Leon cannot come out and say, I have an idea. If God is a woman, might not have gone over so well.
Right.
But what is he saying? The ancient Rabbi Shimon is teaching us about the Shechinah, about the feminine, and how she's in love with the masculine dimension of God. So that explains, why the Zohar has to be written in this cryptic style. It's in a cryptic style. It's in this weird Aramaic, in order to make it a little difficult to figure out. And also, he can't come out and say, I'm the author, because he's afraid of criticism. There were critics of Kabbalah. There were critics who said, this looks like a multiplicity of God. What happens to monotheism? The great contribution of Judaism, that there is one God. Here it seems that there are multiple. In fact, one Kabbalist said this is worse than the Trinity. They turn them into 3, and you're turning them into 10. The Zohar's teachings are so radical and so challenging that, in a sense, the author has to attribute it to an ancient source. So attributing it to Rashbi allows him to
Mm.
then be radical.
He's able to get away with these things because it's not
Yeah,
him saying this; it's the great Rashbi.
right. Because he knows there are critics, at the time. Remember, this is being written in the wake of Maimonides, and the relation between Maimonides and the Zohar is very important, because the Kabbalists are indebted to Maimonides, and yet they're so uncomfortable with some of the outcomes of Maimonidean thought, and some of the radical followers of Maimonides who questioned, does God need mitzvot?
Right.
We know who God is. We know the nature of God to a certain extent. Does God need? God needs nothing. Why does God need us to put on tefillin?
Right.
In fact, in Moses de Leon's Hebrew writings, you have a precious description of people in the synagogue on Sukkot
Mm.
saying, "Who needs to shake a lulav? Does
Mm.
God need that? It's enough to know who God is."
Mm.
So the Zohar is very troubled by that. What does Kabbalah mean? Tradition. The Zohar is committed to tradition. It's trying to bolster tradition because of the challenge of Maimonides. But on the other hand, they learned so much from the Rambam, from Maimonides. For example, Ein Sof, I would say there are three great contributions that Kabbalah makes in its radical new theology. One is Ein Sof, God is infinity, that we've mentioned. Now, Maimonides never uses that phrase, but you could say Maimonides' God is basically Ein Sof.
Right.
Maimonides would be very uncomfortable with the 10 Sefirot, with the sexuality within God. He would turn over in his grave.
Right.
In fact, I can hear him right now turning over in his grave, that we're discussing the feminine nature of God, the masculine nature of God. So I would say that the three great contributions the Zohar makes to a new theology, a new ancient theology, and we can talk about that phrase too in a moment. One is that God is ultimately infinite. All of those biblical names are not really adequate to describe the totality of God. God is beyond what we can imagine, beyond what we can name. So Ein Sof is a beautiful way to refer to that, the infinite. But on the other hand, if we're going to talk about God, we have to balance the traditional God who's so patriarchal with the other half, with the feminine. Right? And this isn't only in Judaism. All Western religion, God is father, king, ruler, judge, warrior. God's overly, so extremely masculine and patriarchal. And the Zohar says that's half the picture. Ultimately, God is beyond gender. Ultimately, God is infinite. But if we're going to talk about God, we have to balance the masculine with the feminine. And you might say this is the greatest contribution of the Zohar, to insist that God is equally male and female. Now, that's very radical, but in a sense, you already have that in Bereshit. In a sense, you have that at the very beginning of Genesis. Genesis chapter 1, God creates Adam. What does the Hebrew say? Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam b'tzalmo. God created the human in his image. B'tselem Elohim bara oto. In the image of God, he created him. Zachar u'nekeva bara otam. Male and female, he created them. So male and female describes not only who was created, but the creator, the original prototype, the image is male and female. The human outcome is male and female, and the divine original is male and female. Right. Genesis is at least implying that. The Zohar, as it often does, takes an implication and turns it into a declaration. So what does it mean that God is male and female? God is Shechinah, the feminine aspect of God, and the normal rabbinic masculine aspect of God, known as the Holy One. Blessed be He. You could underline He. How do we know that Shechinah is feminine? Because it starts S-H-E, she, right? Some can work better in English than in the original. So Shechinah is the divine she. She's married to the divine he. And that's not just, a comment the Zohar makes. That's the central theme of the Zohar, the union of the male and female. You began our whole discussion tonight. We're doing this for the sake of the unification of the Holy One, blessed be He, and His Shechinah. So that reflects the tone, the message of the Zohar. The whole point of Judaism, the whole point of life is to unite the male and female. Now, what does that mean? It sounds so bizarre. It sounds so un-monotheistic. It sounds so anti-monotheistic. If God is one, how can God be male and female? So the Zohar says again and again, one of your favorite phrases, v'chol achad, all is one. We're talking about these aspects of God, but ultimately all is one. You might say, I'm not saying the Zohar says that, but I think that the Zohar says this, but I think ultimately theology is to a great extent projection. Right? We're projecting human qualities onto God. The Zohar is saying, the male has been projected too much onto God. Now it's time to project the feminine onto God. It's not how the Zohar says it. The Zohar is saying God is male and female, but ultimately there's this neutral divine energy beyond gender. But in any case, to balance the patriarchal traditional formulations in the Bible, in the Talmud, the Zohar doesn't invent Shechinah, right? The Kabbalah invents the phrase Ein Sof, the infinite. The Zohar doesn't invent the term Shechinah. That you never find in the Bible, but you find her frequently in the Talmud.
Right.
But you would never find in the Talmud that the Shechinah is married to the Holy One, blessed be He. If you see something like that, you know you're reading the Zohar, not the Talmud. So what does that mean? That there's a male and female within God and they're united? It's certainly so mythical. I think what it's saying is that God is not yet unified. We have to help bring about the unification. And that brings us to the third great contribution. The first is God is infinite. The second, God is equally male and female. And we want to talk more about that. The third is that God needs us. The Hebrew for this is a beautiful phrase, tzorech gavoah. It's often pronounced gavoha, but it's really tzorech gavoah, the need on high. So God is somehow in need of our contribution. If we don't contribute actively, God remains unfulfilled in a way. You might say we actualize the divine potential in the world by acting virtuously, by acting righteously, by helping one another, by creating a just society. We are bringing out the divine potential. It's a beautiful name for Shechinah, not in the Zohar, but by another Kabbalist, Sod HaEfshar, the secret of the possible. Shechinah is the secret of the possible. It's up to us to make that possibility real by acting in holy ways. So the way the Zohar says that is, sometimes it just says that simply, but sometimes it translates it into something more mythical. We unite the Shekhinah with her partner. I think that means we make God whole. We make God one. How? What's the mystical technique to do that? Normal Judaism. If you fulfill the mitzvot, you're succeeding in a mystical task. That's one of the beautiful things about the Zohar. It's so radical and it's so traditional simultaneously. Takes us back to that word Kabbalah, tradition. The Zohar is radical but traditional, and that reminds me that the Zohar is new, ancient. That's how the Zohar describes its own teachings, right? The beautiful phrase, Milin Chadatin Atikin. Milim Chadashot Atikot, new ancient words. Why would the Zohar call teachings new ancient words? Maybe he's being a little playful here. Maybe he's saying, it's brand new. I'm writing it right now in the year 1285, more or less, but it's ancient. It goes back to Rabbi Shimon. Is it new or ancient? I'm writing it, but it's not me. Something's coming through me. Some ancient stream of wisdom is coming through. What seems new is actually ancient. So it applies to his own consciousness. It applies to the Zohar style, Aramaic. It's ancient, but he's making a new form of Aramaic. But it also applies specifically to Shekhinah. How is she new and ancient? It's certainly radically new to say God is half male and half female. You never find that in the Bible. You never find that in the Talmud. But in a sense, it's older than the Bible. Because in the ancient Near East, we do find a goddess. There's a very popular goddess in the ancient Near East. We know that because of the Bible. The Bible is out to get her. The Bible is out to eliminate the goddess, right? Asherah. If you find Asherah, if you find the image of Asherah, destroy it. Right? The Torah says that. Why? Because there were people attracted to the goddess. So we know from the Bible itself there were Israelites who were attracted to the divine feminine. But it's not just that they are rejecting the traditional God and they're attracted to the divine feminine. Some Israelites want to combine the worship of the true God, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, with Asherah. Right? Archaeologists have found inscriptions, I am offering this gift to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh and his Asherah. How can that be? How could there be Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh and his Asherah? So some Israelites wanted to combine the male and female without rejecting the God of tradition. Now, the authors of the Bible are totally opposed to this, but we know what was going on. You could say what happens in Kabbalah is the goddess reemerges, right, from her banishment. From the successful elimination of the goddess, she was never totally gone. She pops up in rabbinic literature, but she emerges in full-blown attire, full-blown personification in the Kabbalah. You could say, Sholem has a beautiful phrase, the revenge of myth. And that really applies to Shekhinah. You could say more popularly, the goddess has finally become kosher. In a sense, that's who Shechinah becomes. Now, the word goddess is very frightening to people because of the biblical author's opposition to the goddess, but the Zohar isn't so opposed to that. I think maybe the most radical thing in the whole Zohar, and I'm often hesitant to say this, but I'm talking with someone who's very radical too. So I'll say this. The Zohar actually says that the original name of Shechinah was Asherah. So why don't we still call Shechinah Asherah? Because Asherah became the name for a Canaanite goddess. So from then on, it could no longer be applied to Shechinah. So she's called the Holy Apple Orchard. She's called the Garden. She's called Shechinah. And really, her technical name, of course, is Malchut, Malchut, Kingdom. But I prefer Shechinah. So Shechinah is somehow a reflection, an emergence of that banished goddess.
Wow.
You could really call this Galut HaShechinah. The Shechinah went into exile. Usually that refers to her accompanying the people Israel in exile.
Right.
But it's also this whole, several thousand-year process of the feminine being banished and the feminine reemerging. And I know we want to discuss a little bit about how this is relevant for today, and maybe that's its most relevant point for today, how the feminine emerging is the great movement in modern culture, I think. And the Zohar is pioneering that, not completely successfully. There's still a patriarchal tone in the Zohar, and it's written by men and for men. But despite that, the Zohar is championing this radical emergence of the feminine.
I want to pick up on that last thing that you said there. And I want to ask, because what we are trying to do here in the project is bridge the scholarly, academic, rigorous, critical, historical, contextual with the
Right.
meaningful, the spiritual, the existential, the lived lives of humans. And that's a unity that we're also trying to be miyached. That's another
Right.
one of
Yes.
those yichudim. Those three radical innovations. God is nothing. God is masculine and feminine. God needs us. If we can encapsulate it like that. Those are super fascinating theological, historical innovations, which we could talk for ages about. I'm wondering, what do those mean? What do those three things mean for individuals in their lived lives? In what way does the nothingness of God, and therefore perhaps the unity of all existence by implication, mean for an individual living today? What does the divine feminine mean for an individual today? And what does the divine need of the human mean for an individual today?
That's great. That's great. That really brings us into the present. Mysticism loves to talk about the present and the eternal present, but it's easy to get lost in this century and that century. So let's start with nothing or no thingness, ayin. I think one of its messages is that we have to let go of our current image. Whatever our image of God is, it's inadequate. So not to be satisfied with your current theological understanding, to let it melt down again and again back into this pool of no thingness. Out of that can emerge, some new possibility of who God is. Yeah, you could say, in some sense that it borders on atheism, right? To call, as you said, to call God nothing. But really, it's an attack on idolatry, and I mean idolatry, not an image you bow down to, but mental idolatry, getting fixated on one conception of God. So I think one way to relate to the divine is to let go of who we think the divine is, and that powerful symbol of no thingness helps us to do that. The feminine, that's a constant challenge, and even though the Zohar made a great contribution, the Kabbalah itself is still patriarchal. It's still written by men and for men. Most of the people who studied it and taught it almost exclusively were men. Still today, and some Kabbalists will allow women to study, and some won't. There's a great statement by Mary Daly, the feminist, back in the 1970s. She said, "As long as God is male, the male is God." So picturing God as male is not just a theological problem.
Right.
It's a social problem.
Right.
If we imagine that the one in control is masculine, then naturally that's reflected in family structure, in family dynamics, in politics, in society.
Right.
We assume the man should be in charge because, look, ultimately it's Father in heaven who's in charge.
Right.
So if you say, no, it's Mother in heaven,
Right.
that allows for the woman to emerge on the scene, to take back her power, to
Mm.
take her power, to take back her power. So I think it very easily translates into social reality.
Mm.
But we have to be critical about, to what extent the Kabbalah has really taken it seriously.
Mm.
And I think in general, I don't advocate that people become Kabbalists. I think that there's great wisdom there, but I think we should be skeptical and critical of what the Zohar says, to recognize its greatness and to see ways in which it still has to evolve. And the question of the feminine is definitely there too. In the Zohar, Shechinah is basically passive. She's active too, she's powerful, but in terms of the dynamics of the Sfirot, she's receiving from above, right? She's passive compared to the active male in general.
Mm-hmm.
And that still reflects the social reality of the
Mm.
time.
Mm.
And we need to update that.
Mm-hmm.
And the need that God has for us, that's such a radical statement. I think that means that we're partners with God. It's a way
Right.
to understand covenant.
Right.
The covenant, which is so central to Judaism, that really means from this mystical perspective that uh, not just that God gives to us, we give something to God, we empower God. Now, this is a radical statement, but you find it already in the Talmud and the Midrash. You have, for example, Rabbi Shimon, right? The Zohar is attributed to Rabbi Shimon, and the original Rabbi Shimon, back in the Talmud, it's attributed to him as a beautiful statement. He quotes Isaiah, "You are my witnesses," says God. Rabbi Shimon says, "When you are my witnesses, I am God. When
Mm.
you're not my witnesses, kiviyachol, as if it were possible, I'm not God."
Wow.
So already we have in
Wow.
rabbinic literature that we have the power to affirm God or to deny God, not just to deny our belief in God, but to disempower God.
Right.
So our consciousness, our commitment, our action activates that divine potential.
Yeah. Almost like God needs to be seen to feel real in some sense.
What do you mean to be seen?
To be witnessed, right? We
Ah,
need
uh-huh, uh-huh,
if we're a tree that
uh-huh.
falls in the forest that no one hears, do
Yes.
we have we really
Yes. So
fallen?
that really takes us to awareness,
Right.
right? Awareness is really the key.
Right.
I think mysticism is really about awareness, consciousness, you could say awareness, being aware of the presence, being aware of the divine presence is the religious discovery.
Hmm. There are so many gems here that I'm gonna myself have to rewatch this many times to be able to explore, and I'm sure our audience feels the
Oh, that's
same.
great. We're sparking things
I
in each other.
there's so many wonderful
Yeah,
ways that we can take this, but I
yeah,
think perhaps what I want to do is I want to shift from what we're talking about now, the meaning of the text and the
yeah.
where it might meet us, and I want to speak a bit more practically,
Good.
um, and then perhaps we'll end off.
And we can
Um,
open this if you want.
yes. What do we have? What do we have in the box? We can stitch that back into when we were talking
Sure,
about the
sure, sure.
manuscripts.
Yeah, this is a lovely box that a friend of mine created. So a friend of mine built this box for me because it houses a certain treasure, which I'll take out very carefully. This is the first edition of the Zohar. It's known as the Cremona edition because it was printed in Cremona, Italy in the year 1558. You can take a look here at the beautiful title page. This is the title page, Sefer HaZohar, and here we see Big Cremona in the city of Cremona with the beautiful illustration. This is the opening word done gorgeously, Bereshit, in the beginning, and we'll speak about this teaching, the beautiful radical teaching, how the Zohar interprets the opening of the Torah. It's just a gorgeous edition now almost 500 years old.
Wow.
and a real treasure. This Margot Pritzker uh, acquired this, and she gave it to me as a gift when we completed the project.
What a beautiful treasure.
Yeah.
So this is a first edition Zohar.
Right.
Wow, incredible.
One of the two first editions. There were two competing publishers in two cities in Italy, Mantua and Cremona. And this is not sure which one is rarer. I think this is slightly rarer, but they're both treasures.
Incredible. It's incredible to have the history in one's hands.
Yeah.
We spoke before. You used this phrase, the Gufa Zohar, the body of Zohar, right?
Uh-huh.
So the Zohar has a body. It has heft. It has feeling. It has chomer.
Yeah.
It has which is malchut. Malchut is body. Malchut is material, right? You could say this is Shechinah in some way, right?
Yeah.
For someone who is wanting to approach this magnificent body that we've been talking about, the body of the Zohar,
Yeah.
where does one start? How does one begin? We now have the great benefit of your translation and your elucidations, but is there a section of Zohar? Is there some tips to get into it, to approach the language, a state of mind, perhaps classes that are available for that? I know that many times I've tried myself to enter the Zohar and to bring people into that, and sometimes just starting from the introduction is not the best way to go in. Where does one begin this journey into this mystical journey into the text of the Zohar?
Yeah, I would say, in a sense, it doesn't matter where you begin, because wherever you dip into Zohar, you're going to feel lost. Right? It's really diving into the
Very
ocean.
reassuring.
Very what?
Reassuring.
Yeah, it's almost like diving into the ocean. It's so vast, it's so immense, it's so deep, and it's scary. I was scared of taking on the project of translating it, and partly because I know how overwhelming the Zohar can be. One page can be overwhelming. One line can be overwhelming. To try to navigate the whole thing is overwhelming. But it's so rich and so profound that I think it's worth the risk, and worth the challenge, and worth the effort. So I think, for many people, of course, the Aramaic is just too much of a barrier. So that's why we transformed it into an English text. I have a Zohar course, which I can recommend very highly. We read a few pages of my translation each week. The easiest way to find out about it, I'll describe it briefly, but basically, if you go to my website, Daniel C. Matt, with the middle initial C, danielcmatt.com, and there you can click on Zohar courses. I actually have one where we read the original Aramaic, but the larger group is where we read the English translation, reading a few pages a week. I teach for an hour, and my wife offers spiritual and psychological insights for about half an hour, and then we have questions and discussion. We also have an informal period before we begin. The main part of the class is recorded, and it's available on video. But before that, we have an informal discussion where people can ask, and people talk about their own path to the Zohar. So that's been going on now for 6 years.
Beautiful.
We're in the 7th year of that course. After 6 years, we're in volume 3 of the Pritzker Edition. So we're moving through slowly, but people can jump in at any point. Newcomers are always joining. Some people leave. They might come back half a year later or 2 years later. There's some who've taken it from the beginning for all 30 series. We do a series of 6 consecutive weeks. We study for six weeks on a Tuesday evening. Then we take a little break, another 6 weeks. For the year, from after the Chagim, from the fall till May or June, we usually have three series of 6 weeks each. And it's a wonderful group. You can see sample videos on my website to get a feel for it, and you're welcome to try that out. If you're studying Zohar on your own, without a class, I think it's helpful to do it with a group and in a group, but it's also powerful to do it on your own as long as you approach it carefully. I think you have to check in with a partner or a rabbi or a teacher or a friend to make sure you're not, going off to infinity without wanting to. So if you're doing that, I'd recommend my translation, certainly. If you have fluency in Hebrew, then you can try the original Aramaic. For that, I think the most useful commentary is known as Matok Midrash. The names of the Zohar commentaries are so beautiful. Matok Midrash, sweeter than honey.
Mm-hmm.
And that I used a lot in working on my commentary. I use some older commentaries too. One of the best ones, I think, is Ketem Paz, Finest Gold.
Mm.
That was written by a Kabbalist in the 16th century. Or HaChama, the sunlight. The light of the sun is a beautiful one.
Mm.
So there are traditional commentators, but I think for a modern, if you have fluency in Hebrew, I think the most useful one is that Matok Midrash. It is the Aramaic text and a Hebrew translation and a commentary. The one thing you have to be careful about with any traditional Zohar commentary is that it views it through the lens of Isaac Luria.
Mm.
Luria, that great mystic, the great Kabbalist who lived about 3 centuries after the Zohar, his entire philosophy, his entire mystical system is based on the Zohar, but his own particular reading of the Zohar. And I don't think it reflects necessarily always the simple meaning of the text.
Right.
What I tried to do in the Pritzker edition was really to go back before Luria
Mm.
and to try to show what the original authors meant
Mm.
before Luria did his take on the Zohar. On the other hand, almost all traditional commentaries, at least after the Ari, after the Lion, after Isaac Luria, they follow his system.
Right. Right.
And that, I think, complicates the Zohar to a certain extent. So I'd recommend, if you're using one of these commentaries like Matok Midrash, to be aware and to be wary of where the commentator may be leaving the pshat, the simple meaning, and going into Luria's territory.
That's wonderful. Matok Midrash is written by?
Another Daniel, Daniel Frisch. He passed away some years ago, but he did an amazing edition.
So he's contemporary.
Yeah.
Did you ever have contact with him?
No, I never met him.
Did you want to meet him?
Did I want to?
Was there a desire to connect with
I mean,
traditional
I've benefited
perspective?
from meeting Kabbalists. I once studied with a Kabbalist, a man named Tolagiano
Mm-hmm.
from Tel Aviv, a Kabbalist who lived in Tel Aviv. As valuable, but I remember he said to me something about the gematria of Gamal Abdel Nasser being a demonic,
Right.
and I realized then that that's not where I want to go.
Right.
But it's certainly valuable. I enjoy speaking with and discussing Zohar with traditional Jews, with ultra Orthodox Jews,
Sure.
because they're in touch with the power of the Zohar.
Sure.
And it's very important to me to learn from the academic approach and from the traditional approach. So I'd recommend that too. You can find many classes on the Zohar. Now Chabad, in certain places in Chabad, they'll teach Zohar.
Mm.
Chabad never used to teach Zohar,
Mm-hmm.
but Zohar has become popular
Right.
because of various factors ranging from Sholem to Madonna, and
Shalom to
and
Madonna.
and it's great that there are opportunities to study
Totally.
Zohar. There are online things. There's even a daily page of Zohar. I once started a daily page of Zohar, but I know that I gave it up after some years. But you can find that in Hebrew more than in English. But there are many contexts online to approach Zohar. I think the main thing is to go slowly.
Mm.
To go slowly, to do it either in a group or to check in with people if you're doing it on your own. It can be powerful to do it on your own, but to be aware of the dangers.
Totally.
Why do people say Kabbalah is dangerous? I think
Right.
we should reflect on that for a moment. You always hear this, don't go there. It's very traditional to avoid Kabbalah. Generally, in a traditional yeshiva, Kabbalah would not be taught.
Right.
Maybe the Zohar would be on a high shelf, and the rabbi might say to a certain individual, you can dip into it. Well, why keep it secretive?
Right.
I mean, partly because of the things we've been saying, the radical teachings. To say that God is nothing sounds very heretical. To say that the biblical description is inadequate, that sounds heretical. But I think the two main dangers. I think there's a psychological danger. If mysticism is about letting the self go, that
Mm.
can be totally disorienting.
Oh,
You're not going to be there at 3 o'clock to pick up your kid.
right.
You're not going to be there for your partner, for your spouse. To lose a sense of self is thrilling but terrifying.
Yeah.
You could say every baby is a mystic. Every baby feels at one with the cosmos. And the first thing we learn, the first distinction we learn is me and mommy. Right? So I'm separate from mommy. And then becoming aware of a self is the discovery of an infant. You could say we spend several decades learning to develop a sense of self. And then at a certain point, hopefully through a spiritual path, we can let go to a certain extent at least, or maybe for a moment totally, of that sense of separateness, of that sense of a separate self. But if you lose the self before you have a stable
Right,
self,
right,
that can lead to madness.
right,
So I think that explains the restrictions on age.
right.
You often hear the age 40. Moses Cordovero said 20.
Hmm,
You should be 20 before you study Kabbalah,
hmm.
so that you should have some maturity before you delve into a mystical text. So there's a psychological danger. There's also a related social danger. You could say, who needs the rabbi?
Right,
I have my own path to God. I'm in
right,
touch with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. I'm in touch with the Holy One. I'm in touch with Shechinah. I can hear what to do. I can feel what to do. Who needs the tradition? Who needs halacha? So that threat of abandoning tradition and the danger of losing touch with what you've been used to for several decades, I think those are the main dangers, and those are important
totally,
to grapple
totally.
with if you're studying, if you're dipping into Zohar.
Yeah, yeah. Those are very sagely pieces of advice.
Right.
I like that description you gave earlier of either doing it as a group, in a group context, which is
Right.
very much possible of the Zohar. It's a group test, right? It's describing
Yeah.
a group of mystics. You said if you're doing it alone, make sure to tell someone to give them a heads up. And it almost made me think of like when you go on a hike,
Hike.
right? If you're out in
Yes.
nature for a few
Yeah,
days,
yeah,
make
yeah.
sure people know where you're going.
Yeah,
So
you're hiking into the
we're
wilderness.
going into the
You're
wilderness, and
venturing into the wilderness, somebody should know.
totally, totally. And this is no
And you should
different,
check in, you should check in with a friend, with a partner. Maybe you can do it with them, which is great,
right?
but it's also useful for them to be grounded
Right,
and for you to venture out and to
right,
check back in.
right. I actually didn't know that you're co-teaching alongside your wife.
That kind of developed gradually. At first I did it on my own, and then actually what happened was my mother passed away, and she was with me that session.
Hmm.
And then a few weeks later, she started offering her own comment,
Hmm.
and then it grew and grew, and now it's regular.
That's
I
amazing.
teach for an hour. She teaches for 20 minutes, half an hour. She's had the flute for a while. The last few weeks I've done it on my own.
That's delightful.
But it's beautiful. And some people, really want and yearn for her approach, and have a man and woman
Right.
doing it together. It
Right.
really enriches it.
In some ways, that's the embodiment of the
Yes.
Zohar's vision
Yeah.
of the divine, which is teaching, nurturing, giving in both
Right.
masculine, both feminine as a shared
Yeah.
unit.
It
That's really
makes it
beautiful.
more authentic
Yeah.
and more powerful.
Yeah. I will put a link to your website and to the classes down in the description beneath the video so
Great.
people can find
Great.
that immediately. Um,
Yeah, I've always told people on the website, but there's a more specific link of, website, and click on Zohar
great.
courses.
I'll get that link from you
Then
and
it's more
it'll be
great, great.
available
I'll
right
send it
there.
to you.
People can
Perfect.
find that stuff.
Great.
Um, what an honor it is to be able to share and promote the wonderful work that you're
Thank,
doing.
thank you.
I wanted to maybe end with a passage of Zohar, a
Mm,
favorite passage of yours,
mm,
that we could perhaps even open up in this exquisite
mm, mm,
treasure of a
mm.
text and study together.
Wow.
And before doing that, I wanted to give you back this paper and make sure that I didn't miss anything that felt important for you. You can take a
Yeah.
minute to look over because I
Very
saw you made
good.
some thoughtful notes there.
Yeah, yeah.
This has been so delightful and so much fun.
Good for
Thank
me
you.
too.
Glad.
Really, I've done a lot of interviews. This is just the back and forth, and you're the fact that you're just so grounded in it and familiar with it and swimming with it. It's really
I
been
appreciate that greatly. Thank you.
beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, I think just a couple of passages. One we can do from here, and one maybe I'll just mention.
Awesome. Awesome.
Basically, because in Mantua I know exactly where it is. In Cremona, it's a lot of fun. But the first one, I actually have a Mantua too, but a reprinted Mantua. A
Uh-huh.
guy in Paris, beautiful guy, Michael Seban.
Uh-huh.
You might want to interview him. You have a French accent. I guess he doesn't really have English. Hebrew and French, but his English is minimal. But you can see there, there's my 12 volume, and to the
Yes.
left of it, 3 volumes, that's his Mantua Zohar.
Got it.
When we're done, I'll show you, because there's a
The
beautiful,
beige Zohar there.
huh?
Yes.
There's a beautiful thing there.
I like that you say my Zohar, because it's both your set and your...
I always say Pritzker Zohar, but I never say my Zohar like the cloud. I would say Pritzker. I say, open
Right.
Pritzker.
I also noticed you said that you transformed it into English. Not that you translated it into English. I noticed you said that.
Yeah, I often say translated, but yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Let us have a look. And what I'll do is I'll bring this around.
Yeah, I'll read a line or two in Aramaic, but then I'll just paraphrase it, because it's so, it's so technical, it's so poetic, it's so. So this is the opening page of the Zohar in the Cremona edition. Actually, in the more normal editions of the Zohar, it comes a few pages in, because the Zohar has its own hakdama, its own introduction. But the Cremona edition starts right with Bereshit, in the beginning. Okay, so we all know the first words of the Torah. In the beginning, God created. For the moment, we can even leave aside the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God created. In the Hebrew, it's just 3 words: Bereshit, bara, Elohim. Bereshit, in the beginning. Bara, created. Elohim, God. In the beginning, God created. But strange, the Hebrew puts the subject after the verb. It doesn't say Bereshit Elohim bara. In the beginning, God created. It says Bereshit bara Elohim. In the beginning, created God. Now, in English, you can do that. You can put the subject after the verb, very formal English. Thus spoke the king. It means the king spoke.
Right.
In Hebrew, you can do it much more frequently. It's almost normal in Hebrew and in modern Hebrew. But the Zohar says, no, let's read it in the exact order it's written. It doesn't mean in the beginning God created. It means in the beginning, or with beginning, because that letter bet can mean in or with. With beginning, it created God. God now becomes the object of creation rather than the subject. Now that sounds totally heretical.
Yeah.
And in fact, the Talmud says when you're translating the Torah, be very careful, because you might mistranslate it by taking the words out of context. You might think it's saying, in the beginning created God. The Zohar does exactly that. So how can it say it? What does that mean? Obviously, God is not created. What the Zohar is saying is that ultimately the subject is not what we think of as God. It's the ultimate reality of God, Ein Sof. And Elohim refers to one of those qualities of God, in this case, Bina, the Divine Mother. So now the phrase means with Reshit, with the primordial point of the divine emanation, the unnamed one. Why is the subject not named? Because the subject is nameless.
Right.
The subject is Ayin, or Ein Sof. With beginning, the unnameable source emanated Bina, emanated Elohim. So it can get a little technical here, this sphera, that sphera, but I think its message is what we think of as God is not the ultimate reality of God. What we think of as God is later, and we have to reimagine who God is. And the Zohar's stimulating us and compelling us to do that.
Wow. Could I ask a treat, a favor?
Sure.
I would love to hear that
A
teaching
little.
in the language of the Zohar.
Sure. Bereshit. Beresh harmanuta de malka. Galif gilufe betihiru ila'a. Botsina de cardinuta. Nefek gostim de stimu. Meresha de ensof. Kutra begulma. Na'it beizka. La chavar. Vela ukam. La sumak. Vela yarok. Vela v'gavan klal. Kadmadid meshicha. Aved gavnin la'anhara. Lago bago botsina. Nefek chad neviu. Dimine its taba'u gavnin latata. Stim gostimin miraza de ensof. Beka v'la avera dile. La ichida klal. Ademigo de chiku de v'kiute. Nehir nekuda chada stima ila'a. Betarhahu nekuda lav ichida klal. Uvigin kach ikre reshit.
Would you care to translate that for us?
At the beginning of the will of the king, he engraved engravings in the luster on high. A spark of impenetrable darkness emerged within the concealed of the concealed, from the head of Ein Sof, a vapor forming in formlessness, set in a ring, not white, not black, not red, not green, no color at all. When a band measured, it produced colors to shine within, within. Within the spark, there issued a flow from which colors emerged below, concealed within the concealed of the secret of Ein Sof. It broke through and did not break through its ether, was not known at all, until under the impact of breaking through, one high hidden point shone. Beyond that point, nothing is known, so it is called beginning, the first command of all.
Marvelous.
Thank you. It's so gorgeous.
Thanks for entertaining my.
Good. No, it's so important to read that.
Oh, that was so delicious to hear the
Yeah.
Aramaic. It's like a rich, velvety chocolate. I don't even know how to describe. Besides for this great, incredible work, the Zohar, you've also been up to other scholarship and other great works. You've done work on Prophet Elijah, done work on science and mysticism, and I'd love to hear some of that work that you've done in the past. Just maybe some brief teasers to that. A lot of people know Daniel Matt, the scholar of Zohar, but there's actually so much more than just that. Although that would be enough. That would be Dayenu, as we say. I would love to hear both about the work that you've done and work that you're currently working on that we the audience can look forward to.
Yeah, great. I'll mention a few of my favorite books that I've composed. One is called The Essential Kabbalah, and it's highlights of Kabbalistic texts. Really, it's an anthology. The entire book is passages from Kabbalah that I've translated. There are a number of Zohar passages in there, but a lot of others from earlier, Sefer Yetzirah, the Bahir, and then later things, Isaac Luria's teachings, one or two from Hasidism, and even a couple from Rav Kook, the great 20th century mystic, but mostly from the classical period of Kabbalah, 13th century to the 16th century. It's divided into themes. God is infinity, the nothingness of God that we spoke about. Shechinah appears really here and there throughout the book. Finding God in the material world, Torah, how the mystics reimagined Torah, and themes like that. That's in English. There's also a Hebrew version called Lev HaKabbalah. Another book is God and the Big Bang, and the subtitle is Discovering Harmony between Science and Spirituality. And there I really say, if science is right and the world began, as they say it did, with the Big Bang, what kind of God makes sense? So really reimagine God as the energy animating the universe, drawing on insights from Kabbalah and Hasidism, and showing certain parallels between mystical theology and modern scientific theories of creation. And more recently, the most recent book I wrote was Becoming Elijah. It's a biography of the great prophet Eliyahu Hanavi, and the title sounds like it's how he became who he became. And that's most of the book. What it does is traces the transformation from the biblical zealot, who Elijah was, to the compassionate Jewish superhero that he became. That's really who Eliyahu Hanavi becomes, right? He's there to help those in need. He'll announce the coming of the Mashiach. How did that grow out of this portrait of the fierce zealot in the Book of Kings? But the way the book ends is with a Hasidic interpretation that each of us has a spark of Elijah within us. We have what's called Bechinat Eliyahu, an aspect of Elijah. So it's really how we ourselves can become Elijah.
Mhm.
So that's the double entendre in becoming Elijah.
Mhm.
At the moment, I'm working on a book called Mystical Gravity, which is really about gravity as the tendency toward oneness.
Mm.
We think of gravity as causing things to fall down, but
Mm.
that's just true locally.
Mm.
On a grander scale, gravity is really, and this is just science, not mysticism, although it is mystical, gravity is really about everything in the universe attracting everything else.
Mm.
So my claim is that gravity is really a tendency toward oneness,
Mm.
or the memory of oneness
Mm.
within all
Mm.
particles of matter,
Mm.
and I'm developing that.
That's exquisite. And I'm sure the Zohar is speaking into that, into those works and into that language. I'm sure
Yeah,
it's all one, as the Zohar insists.
great. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a sense that I get that these ideas are very real for you, that
Yeah.
you're persuaded and compelled by these metaphysical notions.
Yeah, I'm persuaded, and I want to, be critical
Right.
and skeptical.
Right.
I think there's a deep truth there,
Yeah.
and it's almost any formulation of it is going to be also missing something, or,
Sure.
needing
Sure.
the other side.
Sure.
There's one scientist who said, a profound truth implies its opposite.
Hmm.
And I try to keep that in mind too.
Hmm.
But what I do now, my day is really balanced. I do Zohar for an hour or two. I do gravity
Yeah.
for an hour or two. And I
Yeah.
just and I love moving back and forth.
Yeah. We began with a l'shem yichud, that we
Mm,
set an intention,
mm,
a bringing in a hope that our words and our intentions and our actions can bring more unity, more connectedness, more interbeing, and exploring the Zohar with you both now and in the past through your beautiful words have felt like that to me, a way to bring more unity into this world. And the way that you so delightfully describe the melting of identities
mm.
of the authors and the characters and the divine and the audience, that are melting into that mystical dance together. It feels that we get to participate in that together, and for that, I'm so grateful for having been here in your presence, um,
Mm.
and we, the collective, are so grateful for the gift that you've given us translating this text, for this monumental lifetime historic work that you've done. Um, and it's just such a delight to be dancing in that with you. So thank you for allowing us that opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. It was really rich for me, just sharing with you, and seeing how you're thrilled by it stimulated me to connect with its power.
That's awesome. Thank you.
God, that's exciting. It's
Yes,
beautiful. It's
it's
beautiful.
alive.
It's alive.
Great to share it with you.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Yoffi. Yoffi. We'll stay in touch.
Yes, looking forward to it.